Welcome back to the Dr. Cliff Show. This is part 4 of a 6-part bonus series on the hearing loss treatment journey. Coming up. This episode is sponsored by Natus, formerly Otometrics, the preferred diagnostic equipment supplier of the Dr. Cliff Show. Since the 1950s, Otometrics has been one of the most innovative manufacturers of hearing aid fitting equipment and diagnostic hearing and balance equipment in the industry. When it comes to testing and treating our patients, we only want to work with the best. This is why we use Natus in our clinic. Welcome back to the Dr. Cliff Show. I'm Cliff Olson, Doctor of Audiology and founder of Applied Hearing Solutions in Phoenix, Arizona, and I am here with my co-host.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel Cook. I'm also an audiologist at Applied Hearing Solutions. Thank you so much for joining us as we continue on our Natus 6-part bonus series covering the patient journey. So over the last 3 episodes, we have walked through assessing the outer ear status using the Otocam 300. We've also spoken about assessing the middle ear status using the Madsen Zodiac tympanometer, and also assessing the inner ear using the Astera 2 audiometer and results in OtoSuite. So now, if you haven't seen any of those videos, make sure you go back and watch those first. But today's episode is really going to be about hearing aid selection considerations and the creation of custom hearing aids in ear molds using Otoscan. So I'm super excited for this episode today. And if you haven't already, please make sure that you like and subscribe so that you don't miss any parts of the series.
Awesome. All right. So let's jump right into it. If you go back and you watch some of the previous episodes, you kind of see how we've progressed through this process of following best practices along this treatment journey that we are on together. And we had a couple of case studies from that previous episode that we'll be talking about again today in this episode. But really, at this point, we've already done the hearing testing and all of that. We had all that stuff in OtoSuite. We've got everything else diagnostically that we need. And now we need to figure out what type of hearing aids we're actually going to be selecting for a particular patient, and that depends on a variety of different variables that we identified previously. But now we need to start working with what we call person-centered care, where we're trying to really identify what the wants, needs, and values are of our patients so we can make a proper recommendation that fits what they want to achieve out of hearing treatment. And I really think that this is arguably one of the more important parts of what we do. You know, you can't just take any hearing aid off the shelf and fit someone with it, no matter what type of hearing loss that they have, because you're not going to achieve the highest level of outcome possible.
Definitely not. So there are several variables that play into this and considerations that you need to make from a personal standpoint to really identify what is the best hearing aid option for this person, for this individual, this one of one, if you will. And so some personal considerations that we have to take into account as well when we're considering what hearing aid is going to work best for someone. First of all, are they employed? What type of settings are they working in? And are they in these really dynamic listening environments, or are they primarily working from home and they hardly run into people at all? What type of hobbies does the patient really like to engage in? Particularly, are these hobbies where the hearing aids might find themselves being exposed to different elements, things like wind, moisture, of course, sweat, things like that. So, you know, our hikers and our bikers and our cyclists and all of those things like age and dexterity and vision. And I say all of those on the same line because they kind of all play into one another. Not always, but sometimes they definitely do. And so we've got to take into account, is this hearing aid able to be easily manipulated by the user, right? Because we see a lot of hearing aids, they're kind of tricky initially to get fit in the right spot. And last but not least, the features that are available in the hearing aids as well. Are they compatible with what the patient is looking for out of the experience? And so particularly if we go back to like the working and the employment, if this is an individual who is spending hours on every single day on the phone, taking really important phone calls, then, you know, the ability to wirelessly stream audio to both ears to take phone calls could be really, really important to this individual. And it could potentially be doing them a disservice if you got them hearing aids that didn't have that capability. So many things that go into picking really what are the features that are needed for this individual.
And you wouldn't know unless you start asking these questions, because someone who comes into the clinic might not know exactly what they need. They don't have all of this research to figure out, okay, what's the best hearing aid for me? What hearing aid has all the right features? They just know the things that they want to accomplish, and it's our job as audiologists to pull out of them all of the things that they want to be able to do from a hearing standpoint. And that includes all of these other lifestyle characteristics that are situations that they might want to be able to hear better in. And this is very important when you start selecting the style of hearing aid that you're going to be fitting them with. And there's pros and cons to literally every style out there, but if you want to achieve your highest level of hearing performance, you have to make sure that you go with the style that allows you to do everything that you need to do, both acoustically and lifestyle-wise. And we have a variety of different options that we can show on the screen here. Going from right to left here, we have the BTE hearing aids. The behind-the-ear device is on the far right-hand side. And then as you work your way to the left, you can see we have some receiver in canal devices, one of them being rechargeable, the other one being non-rechargeable. In the center of the screen, we have the custom in-the-ear devices starting. That would be considered a full shell custom in-the-ear. You can get that style in both disposable and rechargeable battery as well. And then as you keep working your way further to the left, you can see that those devices get smaller and smaller until you have the invisible in-the-canal hearing aid on the far left-hand side of the screen, just in case you don't actually want anyone to be seeing you wearing a hearing aid.
This entire episode, we're going to be talking about moving into kind of custom hearing aid options, but I'd like to lay some framework as to when the use of a custom ear mold, potentially a custom ear mold or a custom hearing aid, isn't necessarily needed. And so, for example, starting first with an audiogram that shows a high frequency hearing loss, where this individual may benefit from a hearing aid that's a little bit more open fit. So let me kind of lay the framework here for that. So as we're looking at this audiogram, red circles, right ear, blue X's, left ear, but really what we can see is in the low and mid pitches, there is a good amount of normal hearing in those ranges. It's really when we start to get into the high pitches that there's this drop down into the moderate range that then recovers again back up to that normal to mild threshold there. And then if we could take a look at the speech sounds that are impacted by a hearing loss like this one. So any of the speech sounds on the screen, these are all our speech sounds in English, and when we put these together, they form words. Any of the speech sounds that fall into that gray shaded area are not able to make it from this individual's ears up to their brain, and therefore they need to use a hearing aid to gain access to these sounds again. And when we're fitting this individual with a hearing aid, what we're really trying to do is keep that natural low frequency hearing that they have as natural sounding as possible. There's really no reason to apply a significant amount of amplification in an area that you don't have a hearing loss. But for this particular individual, we would be wanting to blend in high frequency amplification to give them access back to those high pitch consonants and those components that really help with the clarity and the sharpness of speech at the same time. And so we have hearing aids that can do that.
Yeah, and you really get the best of both worlds if you can allow those low-frequency speech components come into the ear canal naturally through the open-fit hearing aid, and then blend in those high frequencies like you were mentioning. And we can show you a graphic here on the screen of what an open-fit hearing aid may look like. So these particular devices right here, you can see that the rubber tip on the end of the hearing aids there, they have these open perforations that you can see. That is what allows those low-frequency sounds to enter into the ear canal unaffected, and then the hearing aid will amplify sound, send it down through that wire into the ear canal, and blend it in with the natural sound that you're hearing that's coming in naturally. So you get to use a little bit of your normal hearing, a little bit of amplified hearing to make sure that you have access to those speech components, and then overcome the difficulties that you're having due to your hearing loss.
Right. Now, in this case, we were really looking at a mild to moderate high frequency hearing loss. However, we very often run into hearing losses that do not have that neat or as mild to moderate of a loss pattern there. And in many circumstances, individuals will have hearing losses that do require a better seal in the ear. And there's several reasons that we're about to jump into. Those open perforations that you just referenced, there are many individuals who do not need to have open perforations at all. In fact, we need to trap as much amplification as we can across the frequency spectrum, and we need to have a higher amount of control over the acoustics in that ear canal. And for that reason, that individual would need to be using a custom ear mold.
Absolutely. And if you guys go back past couple of weeks here, we've had a couple of case studies, and Phil's going to jump back up on the screen here because
yes, he is.
Phil has a more significant, let's say, of a high frequency noise induced hearing loss. And you can see how we're dipping down into that moderate to severe range. And when you start looking at all the speech sounds that he's actually missing with this type of a hearing loss, you can see he's missing the same speech sounds. They're the same as the mild level hearing loss that we looked at earlier. The problem is that he needs significantly more amplification to restore those sounds back to an audible level. And if you use an open fit hearing aid or open fit dome on the tip of a hearing aid, you are going to be leaking out too many of these high frequency sounds, and they could actually cause feedback, which is basically the whistling sound that you hear that comes from hearing aids. And so in this particular case, it would not be a good decision to fit this individual with an open fit dome in a lot of cases. While you would still let in those low frequency sounds, if you can't amplify the high frequencies enough to overcome the hearing loss, then what's the point of wearing a hearing aid?
Right. If all of those high frequency sounds are leaking out of the ear canal and getting picked up by the microphone and causing feedback, more often than not, there are feedback managers that place limitations in place, and it will literally make it to where the hearing aid cannot go above and beyond a certain threshold in the effort of avoiding this feedback reaction. Well, if the amount of amplification that you need to overcome the hearing loss at that frequency requires a significant amount of amplification, now the hearing aid really isn't delivering that same amount of amplification that you need to regain access to those sounds.
So the hearing aid could theoretically be the exact same hearing aid. You just need a different tip that goes on the end of that hearing aid to trap in the appropriate amount of sound while still allowing those low and mid frequency sounds to enter in naturally. And that would be an argument to use a custom fit earpiece on the end of a hearing aid for Phil. And this is exactly what one of those would look like. Maybe not exactly. I mean, you can have a variety of different venting that goes into these ear molds, but you can see that is not a rubber dome anymore.
Nope.
That is actually a titanium earpiece that goes deep into the ear canal comfortably, of course, and that is going to allow us to control the amplification levels of those high frequencies better, so Phil can actually hear better using the exact same hearing aid behind his ear.
Yep. Just a different acoustic option. And very often we do see this in clinic where patients will come in and it just really depends on your hearing loss severity, right? So you may begin in an open fit hearing aid, and over time, if your hearing loss were to continue to progress, there may come a time when you need to adjust the acoustics of the actual hearing aid to give you the amplification that you really need. So you may very well start out with a dome. You may progress through several different domes on the end of that hearing aid, and then at some point your provider may say, you know what, you could really benefit from the use of a custom ear mold, and at that point it just means that we need better control over the amplification and over the venting so that we can give you the best possible outcomes.
Yeah, I just had this today in the clinic, and so there's a variety of reasons why you might want to consider going custom from using a generic rubber dome. I had a patient who's been my patient for about 3 or 4 years at this point, and literally just today inside of the clinic, she did not like the way that the dome was fitting inside of her ear anymore. You know, our ear canal sizes and shapes, they change over the course of time, and she just didn't like the fit of it anymore. And so acoustically, we were still doing very good with a rubber dome inside of her ear, but she wanted a better, more comfortable fit without it feeling like it was creating a suction effect inside of her ear because we were using a power dome on her. And so she finally agreed to let me do an ear impression on her so I could order some custom earpieces that will go onto the tip of the exact same hearing aids that she's been wearing for the past several years at this point.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's exactly. It's not always due to the audiogram. I think that's a great point. Obviously, severity is what's going to make us lean more towards one over the other. But again, this is a perfect example of the personal considerations that go into selecting the appropriate hearing aid for you. And one of those, actually one of the top one of those, is comfort. And it's got to feel good. And so oftentimes the use of a custom component, obviously a very personalized fit with a custom component, and that can be more comfortable for some.
Absolutely. Consideration of custom fit components on a hearing aid or a custom fit hearing aid in entirety is considered best practice.
Yeah.
Those are things that should be running through a hearing care professional's head every single time that we get a patient in, looking at the things that they want to accomplish and the amount of sound that they need to get to overcome the level of hearing loss that they have. And so if you are someone with hearing loss and you're using a hearing aid with a rubber dome on the end of it, you have to start asking yourself, is a rubber dome actually the best option for me, or is going with more of a custom ear tip on the end of my hearing aid, same hearing aid, is that going to be a better option? Well, the only way for you to know that is to be asking your hearing care professional and to have them run you through the proper testing to identify if that's actually the case.
Definitely, most definitely. Now we've got another case study. We've got Barbara from last week as well. And Barbara had that mastoidectomy, which is a surgical procedure that resulted in a mixed hearing loss pattern for her. And if all of this sounds super foreign, then you definitely need to go back to last week's episode where we explained this a little bit more in depth. But let's take a look at Barbara's audiogram real quick. As you can see in her right ear, everything is nice and normal. But over on that left-hand side, we see a significant amount of hearing loss, predominantly in the low frequencies. And then as we move through the mid frequencies and the high frequencies, there's a bit of a rising pattern to it. So it does actually get a bit better in those higher frequencies. And those brackets on the screen, those are showing the results that we got with using bone conduction headphones at that point. This just tells us that there is a difference between the amount of sound that can make its way through the auditory system from the outer ear all the way to the inner ear versus what happens when we stimulate just the inner ear, and that contributes to that mixed hearing loss component. All of that being said, Barbara is going to require a significant amount of amplification on that left side to overcome this hearing loss, and for that reason, she's going to need a really good custom fit. This cannot be treated with the use of a standard dome.
Yeah, what would happen if you had a patient who came in who was already treated and they weren't hearing that well with that level of hearing loss and they had an open dome on the tip of their hearing aid?
It happened to me this week. Yeah, it is, we cannot appropriately aid that amount of hearing loss with a dome. I think there's a very small amount of individuals that may be able to reach those targets with the use of a power dome, but I'm going to be advocating for the use of a custom earpiece every single time with a loss like that.
Absolutely. You have to be able to trap in the appropriate amount of amplification. I don't care what the programming software says of the hearing aid manufacturer. You can crank up the volume all you want to inside of that hearing aid, but if you cannot retain the amount of amplification inside of the ear, then you don't actually get the benefit of that particular hearing aid. And I think that it is literally a waste of time and money to purchase a hearing aid for who knows how many hundreds or thousands of dollars and to let that money just basically flush it down the toilet because you're not trapping the capabilities of that hearing aid inside of your ear enough to receive the full amount of benefit. So, if I were Barbara and I were fit with anything other than a custom, at least a custom ear mold on the end of a receiver in canal hearing aid or a BTE hearing aid, if not a custom hearing aid in and of itself, I would be going into my provider and saying, hey, I really think we need to go the custom route for this one.
Most definitely. So if you get to that point in your own hearing treatment journey, how do we get a custom ear mold? How does this even happen, right? So now we get to jump into the conversation about how custom ear molds are made at all. So lead us into that.
Absolutely. So traditionally, silicone impressions are what most providers will do. I mean, they've been doing this for decades at this point. Custom hearing aids have been around for a while. It's not like it's a new concept here. Just a lot of people are unaware that this is something that occurs. But hearing care professionals will actually take a physical impression of your ear canal. They will take a oto block, is what we call it, or oto dam, stick it down inside of your ear canal as far as we can get it without touching your eardrum. And then we will mix up this putty compound that takes about 3 to 4 minutes before it solidifies. And then we'll inject that into your ear canal. And we have an image of this, of what this actually looks like here. So you can see the putty that's being injected into the ear. And after about 3 or 4 minutes, like I said, that will solidify, and then they will remove it from the ear, and you are left with an impression of the actual ear canal. But you then take that and you send it into the manufacturer that you want to be making the custom ear mold for you, and then they will actually start manufacturing it.
Right. And the problem with these is that we can run into some issues when we're using silicone, and this is the more traditional way that impressions have been obtained in the past. But we can also end up with these issues that occur in the actual impressions themselves that may not lead to a great outcome in your custom ear mold or your custom hearing aid. And so we've got a graphic as well that can show an example of some of these issues that come up. So over on the far left-hand side, you see that there's a huge gap and void right there in that conchable area. If we move one step to the right, all the way that upper portion of the helix is missing. If we move again over to the right, that is not a very long ear mold impression at all. So as far as a deep fit goes, that mold may not end up being very secure. And then all the way on the far right, you can see that one also is looking a little short to me too. So both of those do not extend nearly as far as they should be, and that can also result in a pretty poor fit overall from a comfortability and from an acoustic standpoint as well, because we've seen these poor fitting ear molds at times that actually allow too much of the sound to leak back out. Then that causes that feedback, and then again the hearing aid is limiting the amount of amplification that it can deliver because of all that feedback that's coming from it.
Yeah, and hearing aid manufacturers, ear mold manufacturers, they really have a lot of issues with bad impressions coming in to their facilities, because if they get a bad impression, they're looking at it and saying, like, I can't do anything with this. We're going to have you bring the patient back into your office, take another physical impression. Hopefully that one's better because you missed the helix here. You didn't inject the material far enough into the ear canal. We can't build an invisible in the canal device based on this impression that you sent us. And I don't know what the percentage is. I knew it at one point in time, but there is a large percentage of physical ear molds that are sent into manufacturers that they literally cannot use.
Oh, yeah.
And then you're having to call your patient back into the clinic, which is inconvenient for them.
Oh, yeah.
And most clinics, the providers, the really good ones, are really busy, and so it's hard to get back in to see them, so it's incredibly inconvenient. Not to mention, most people don't like the sensation of being plugged up inside of their ears. They know that it's necessary in some cases to have a physical impression done to get a better outcome with hearing treatment, but it can be a little bit messy, uncomfortable to some degree. The provider can't necessarily see if they're getting all of the spots until they do the impression, pull it out, and examine it.
Yeah.
And it's really tricky from a provider standpoint. And then heaven forbid you have something called a blow-by.
Yes. Heaven forbid. This has happened to me. Not that I did it, but this has happened to me myself from someone else doing it to me. But there are times when the silicone impression material goes past that otodam that you were talking about earlier and goes into an area up against the eardrum where that silicone material should not be. And we have a graphic of this as well. This is an example of an impression that went beyond where the otodam was placed, and now that remaining impression material on the far right hand side is essentially touching the eardrum. And unfortunately, you can get some pressure pockets that are created with that as well, so that when you go to remove that impression from the ear, it is pretty painful. There are instances where individuals have had to have these removed by an ear, nose, and throat physician from their ear as well. So just several considerations with silicone impression material that you most definitely got to keep in mind. Absolutely.
Now, I don't want to be an alarmist here. I don't want to make it seem like every time that you get a physical impression that your life is at risk with this, or that it's extremely painful. The vast majority of physical impressions that are done can be done and done safely as long as you're working with a really good hearing care professional. But that's one of the reasons why you might want to consider going a different route when it comes to getting an ear impression. And I think that's why we love in our office so much the Natus Otoscan device, because this allows us to do a digital scan of the ear canal without having to inject any type of impression material inside of the ear.
Into the ear, yes. So the Otoscan, they actually won the Hearing Technology Innovator Award for this product, and I can most definitely see why, especially as we use it nearly every single day in the clinic. Really, we have a graphic of how this is set up, and the Otoscan, as you can see, instead of using that silicone impression material, we're actually using lasers, and these lasers are mapping out the entire anatomy of the ear canal, as well as the pinna and the external ear Using this headband up on the top that you see, there's a bunch of points around the perimeter of that are used as calibration and reference points. And then this scanner is using several different types of lasers, both ring lasers and line lasers, to map out the anatomy of the entire ear.
Absolutely, and you can kind of walk through the progression of this as well. When you're doing the digital scan, you can actually move that scan around to see, okay, am I getting all of the parts of the ear that I want to, so I know that when I upload these to the manufacturer that they have a really high quality ear mold. You can see things like artifact, you can see if you went in deep enough into the ear canal. You can actually make a better decision of what type of earpiece you might want to use based on the shape and bends of the ear canal. But you can also get things in addition to just hearing aid ear molds with this. What else can we get?
You can get custom hearing protection that is also created off of these digital scans. And so, for example, on the screen there, that would be an example of a silicone earplugs for the use of hearing protection. And gaps are not good for this. We need to make sure that the scan that we're getting, that the impression that you're getting is as solid and as complete as possible so that none of your hearing is being compromised by a poor fit for them.
And so many companies are starting to accept these types of scans. It's not like you only have one option if you're going to send these scans off. You can pretty much go to any, hearing aid manufacturer, take these digital scans and send them directly to those manufacturers so they instantaneously have them to start production. So if speed is something that you're looking for, it goes a lot quicker to get a digital scan done, upload it to a cloud, have them pull it off instead of having to put it through the mail system. Who knows what happens to the mail nowadays. I just sent my mother her birthday flowers and she still doesn't have them, and it's like 4 days past her birthday. I'm the bad guy because of the U.S. Postal Service. But nonetheless, that is something that you don't want to have happen to your ear mold impressions in the mail. You have to go back and get them done again. And the thing that I love probably more than anything is that I can take one digital scan of each ear and I could send them to 5 different companies if I want to. If you do physical impression, you have to do 5 impressions of that individual and send them through to each place that you want them to go, and hopefully they were all good quality enough for them to be able to use. And on top of that, it's more expensive for the patient. So if they have to pay for 5 physical impressions, that is a lot more than just paying for one digital impression that you can send off in the cloud to every manufacturer.
Anywhere. And like you said, such an advantage for the manufacturer to be able to begin production on whatever they're producing for you nearly immediately rather than just waiting for it to show up in the mail. And oftentimes we do see patients and we're completing a hearing aid fitting sequence on them, and there are things that come up that require us to change manufacturers or to change styles. Like you said, that would require another ear mold impression be done and another ear mold impression be done. We don't have to worry about that at all. If I know that I'm switching someone from a manufacturer, I can take that scan and all I have to do is get it sent right on over to that other manufacturer. I don't have to worry about getting the patient back into the office and redoing impressions and sending them in again and hoping that they get there in time. I mean, the time, the money, the effort, the everything, so much more streamlined with the use of digital scans.
Absolutely. And the thing that I think that I like to talk about a lot with patients is that this is the future of how we do ear impressions. We're not injecting putty in most cases anymore. We are doing digital scans. This is on the tip of the spear in terms of innovation. That's why they won an innovation award for this. This is the tip of the spear of how things are going to be happening. And, not as many providers are using this equipment as I think that should. I think the pros substantially outweigh any potential cons that you could come up with using this potential technology. And the other thing is it's just super cool.
It is.
Right? As a patient, as you're going through this, you're like, holy cow, that is my ear canal that is getting built right in front of me. And it's just a really cool experience to go through.
I think so too. And I think you made a good point. You said that this is the technology of the future, but quite honestly, this is the technology at present. We own the equipment. The equipment's been out for a few years. This really is the way to go. And so obviously these things take time. People have to, purchase new equipment or phase out old equipment. But this really is the technology for the now. And there's really no reason that these offices won't get updated to this equipment sooner rather than later, because from a provider standpoint, it makes my life so much easier as well.
You know, our patients, they don't care pretty much about all of our other equipment a whole lot. They care about this
They
stuff.
love this
They love it. When
experience.
this comes out, I don't think I've had a single patient that hasn't mentioned that, like, oh my gosh, this is the coolest thing
This
ever.
coolest thing ever. I also
Absolutely.
agree. I think it
Absolutely.
is the coolest thing ever.
So, you know, when we started talking today, we were talking about this aspect of making sure that we're following this journey along throughout this entire process. We had a couple of earlier episodes in this series that you guys definitely need to make sure that you check out. But for today's purposes, we're really talking about the hearing aid selection process and identifying what type of hearing aid that you need, whether it's receiver and canal with a rubber dome that's an open fit, whether it's a behind the ear hearing aid with a custom ear mold, or whether it's just a custom in the ear hearing aid, making sure that you identify what the correct style is, and then going through the process of making sure that you get that style built in a way that is going to optimize your performance outcomes. And so I think that's why this part of the discussion is so important, and we haven't even gotten into the fitting process of this stuff yet.
Nope, the hearing aids are not even in your hands by this point yet. But I think that that's the point. The point of this entire series is to demonstrate in a way that there is so much that goes into getting the appropriate hearing aids for you and for yourself, ones that are individualized and personalized to you as a person, to your lifestyle, to your needs, to your wants, to your hearing loss, the power considerations that are needed. And the Otoscan is just another part of this entire lineup of tools that we use in the clinic to make sure that you end up with the most personalized outcomes for you.
Absolutely. So what are we going to be talking about here coming up next week?
So next week, we are going to be talking about hearing aid quality control. And so we do quality control on all sorts of pieces of equipment, right? But for hearing aids particularly, it is so important that your devices are meeting manufacturer specifications and that they're doing all of the things that they need to be doing to work as hearing aids for you. So we are going to jump into how we do that in the clinic and why it is so important as well.
Yeah, and if you guys have missed those previous episodes, make sure that you go back and check them out so you can make sure that you're up to speed with this entire journey up until this point. And we really hope that you liked today's episode. If you did, make sure that you hit that like button. If you are not subscribed to the channel yet, make sure that you hit the subscribe button with notification bell as well. And as always, we'll see you next week.